Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Foxy and this is Foxy Books and Planning. Welcome to my reading wrap up for the month of May. Before we get into going over all of the things that I've either read or am working on this month, I just wanted to say that I'm kind of disappointed in myself this month. I hit a bit of a reading slump during this last month of work from home because I had I had things going on where I had to really focus, and it was really hard for me to do my normal listening to books while I was doing that, and I was on and off of a lot of meetings, which also made it difficult. And I just really didn't have a whole lot of bandwidth after I was done with work to read. So not a month I'm super proud of this month, but I did at least get some stuff read. And so with that, let's move right into the things I finished this month. So the first book that I finished for this month is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I had this as an audiobook from my library and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really like Gabriel Garcia Marquez as an author. I really appreciate his magical realism and his way of making literary fiction interesting. But I found this book in particular kind of hard because it is longer than most of his other books, and it was difficult for me to keep track of, which is also one of the themes of this month. Was I was reading or listening to a lot of dense books, and normally when I'm working I'm listening to something that's kind of easy, so it doesn't matter if I space out for a couple of seconds, I can still come back and still understand what's going on. But with these books, if I tuned out for a second, I would be completely lost and have to back up. But so anyway, 100 Years of Solitude follows the story of the Buendia family as they found the town of Macondo in rural Colombia, and we follow the Buendia family and Macondo through 100 years of history from their founding to sort of the dying breaths of the town and the family. So you see multiple generations, and one of the reasons I found this book so hard to listen to was a lot of the main characters, because we are following a family in South America. A lot of the family members have the same names, and they might be a different name, but it'll be the same 3 base names in different arrangements. And there are some sections of the book where you may have 4 or 5 characters who are Jose blank Buendia, and it's really hard to keep track at that point of who everybody is, and that's kind of part of the point of the book, but also it makes it really hard as a reader or listener to keep track. I really did enjoy the elements of magical realism and the elements of realism, if that makes any sense, because there are elements of both in the book. And I did enjoy the overall story and message that the book was trying to get across. But that is all I have for that one. The next book I finished was Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is Wolf Hall book 1 of 3, I believe. The 3rd book comes out later this year. This one I really struggled with. And I didn't realize why I was struggling with it until I went and read the Wikipedia page for this book after I finished it. Because I came into it thinking it was going to be the Tudors from Thomas Cromwell's perspective. And Tudor history, Plantagenet history, that kind of 200 years from 1400 to 1600 are like my sweet spot of English history. And I know it's a lot of people's sweet spots on English history because it's absolutely fascinating. So I expected that, more like a Philippa Gregory kind of fictionalized history, but it's still grounded. And on the Wikipedia page, Hilary Mantel says straight out that this was a fictional biography of Cromwell. So, and that she went to immense lengths to make sure that the book was as historically accurate as possible. And And while there are some sections that are brilliant, a lot of the sections drag because a lot of the sections are Thomas Cromwell talking to somebody else about events that are going on in a third place. And there's just lots and lots of conversations, and they're dense. And if you miss a detail, you don't understand what the rest of the conversation's about. And with that, I really struggled. I liked some of the insight I got into Thomas Cromwell as a historical figure, because a lot of the histories that I've read and a lot of his portrayal in the media, with the exception of this, paints him to kind of be a manipulative, conniving man who just wanted power. And this book really does a lot to humanize him. It was just so long. And so this is book 1 of 3, and Cromwell is really a mainstay of English history from like 1520 to 1540 something. So we've got 20 odd years of history. And this book covers from his birth to just after the birth of Queen Elizabeth, or Princess Elizabeth at this point. And I am just like, oh my god. So as much as I want to continue this series, I'm not sure if I really want to, because I know from the next couple of, or from my knowledge of Tudor history, Thomas Cromwell doesn't live a whole lot longer. And I'm kind of worried about how thick and dense the next 2 books are going to be if we're only going to cover a couple of years at a time. That being said, it was really well written, and I did enjoy the concept initially of the book, which is why it got 3 stars. But I would be up in the air about recommending it to friends. If you really wanted to know more about Thomas Cromwell, a regular biography would probably be just as good. Or if you've read any of the umpteenth histories of the Tudor dynasty, you've probably known a lot of what's covered in these books. So there's that. That's my thoughts. The next one I finished was Inside Jobs by Ben Winters. This was an Audible original, and I gave it 4 stars. This was one of the free Audible originals for the month of May. Again, Audible did a really nice thing, which was for the month of May. Instead of having to pick 2 of their 6 to 9 Audible originals to get for free along with your 1 free audiobook, you could have as many of them as you wanted. So you could have all of them, you could have none of them, whatever you wanted. And so I ended up picking up a lot of them this month. And so Inside Jobs is 3 short stories that tells different stories of quarantine. And I really loved the first story. The second story I didn't get. And the third story was just meh. Because the first story is about a group of gangsters who are trying to plan a heist over Zoom. And that, for any of you who have ever done a Zoom call, it is hilarious to listen to. Because you can just see these people, and you can see the Zoom meetings or WebExes or whatever you've been on with your teams, and you just know this stuff happens in real life. The second one is about 2 brothers as they're trying to come to terms with their father's death and deal with the house, because they end up quarantined together on in a beachside community in New England. And then the third book reads very much as an homage to Rear Window. I think it's Rear Window. I will check, but I'm pretty sure it's Rear Window. But I really enjoyed the first story. I found the second story entertaining, so that's why it got 4 stars. My next book that I completed this month was The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This is Discworld Book 1 and Rincewind Subseries Book 1. I really enjoy Terry Pratchett. I really enjoy Discworld, and most people, when you start reading Pratchett, they tell you to start with Mort which is what I started with. Highly recommend you start there. It makes a lot more sense if you start there. But I had never gone back and read the early books. Most of my reading happens from like book 10 onward, and Discworld is huge. There's at least 40 novels, not including tie-ins and spin-offs and all of these other things. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed seeing the early development of Discworld and a little more of the background that you don't necessarily get in the newer books, because they assume you've read all of them. And a lot of the jokes were hilarious, and I cannot wait to get into the next one, which I have listed for myself to borrow from the library, but I wanted to clear out my current library holds list a little bit more before I went ahead and borrowed that. The last book I finished this month was Children of Blood and Bone by Tony Adeyemi. This is a physical book. Huzzah! I'm so proud of myself. I finished it. I ended up giving this 3 stars. And I really liked the idea of this book. I liked the first half to 2/3 of this book. And why I liked it is it was a twist on a hero's journey that I hadn't seen before, with a really interesting magic system, interesting lore, interesting mythology in a area that I'm not as much familiar with in terms of African or Nigerian myth and African kind of culture and the different tribes and whatnot. So that was really, really interesting. And I was really invested in this hero's journey, even though the main character suffers from that I'm a teenage girl, woe is me kind of whiny bitchiness at some points. But overall was really impressed, had really high hopes. And then we threw a romance in because it's a YA novel and it's a fantasy. So we have to have 2 of our characters fall in love. And that's where this fell apart for me, was I didn't believe the romance. I didn't feel like the romance happened in a way that I could believe it happening under these circumstances. And it doesn't do anything really to help the story. It basically triggers a side quest for those of us who are RPG fantasy video gamers. It's one of those things where you have a cutscene where the 2 characters are really into each other and you're like, where did this come from? And then it sends you on a side quest and you're like, oh, that's why they're into each other. So I really wasn't happy with it. It also, the introduction of the romance and the side quest really ended up rushing the last bits of the book, which were the parts where it was like, this is where our journey is going, come on. Which really, it's just stop one on our hero journey, but whatever. So the ending ended up being really rushed as well. And I get why she did it, because she needed it to be a cliffhanger to pull into the next book. But I think there were better ways to do the ending. And if nothing else, that side quest section probably could have been cut for the most part, if I'm honest. But that being said, I do want to try book 2. I want to see if book 2 redeems itself, and to see if this relationship that popped up, 2 relationships that popped up, are actually believable, or if they were just for plot convenience, and to see if Adeyemi can deliver on the premise that she set up in this book. Alright, so those were all the books I finished this month. So now we get to my favorite game of how much progress did we make this month. Alright, so the first book I'm working on this month is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kessery. I'm going with it. I had this as a library audiobook and I got 13% of the way into it before it had to be returned to the library. This one, we're following a guy at an Oregon mental hospital, and a guy shows up who kind of throws a wrench in the normal workings of the mental ward. And it reads very much like Vonnegut does, and very much like some of Chuck Palahniuk's works do. The way I described it to my significant other is kind of a baby between Slaughterhouse-Five and Fight Club, in the way it's narrated and kind of the trippy stuff. And he was like, yes, sweetheart. If it's a book from the acid trip, from the 60s. That's kind of part of that acid trip literature. But I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm waiting to get it back. I hope it doesn't take too long for me to get the loan back, because I really do want to keep going with it. But yeah, so then the next one is the physical book that I used to replace Children of Blood and Bone, which is The Gilded Wolves by Kashani Chusky. This one was one that I featured in my Is My TBR Reasonable, or I talked about a little bit in my Is My TBR Reasonable duology of things. And I was so excited to pick this book up after I finished Children of Blood and Bone. It's an alternate universe France in the 1890s, where there are secret magic cults, or not cults, houses that are fighting for control of mystical artifacts that allow them to gain power and control the magic that flows from fragments of the Tower of Babel. And we're following a group of people led by the heir to a house that has been declared extinct, and he is trying to regain his house, and all of the others have their own motivations. And it's very much like a YA Ocean's 11 fantasy type thing that I'm really looking forward to reading more of. I've made 13% progress, so I am here. Just under a third, I believe. Alright, so it's... So it's just under 400 pages, so I'm about a quarter of the way through now. I did read the first 50 pages last month, but I didn't count it because I didn't want to count the books from my TBR reading until I actually picked them back up again, or they would all be on here forever, and that would not be fair to y'all. But I'm really enjoying it so far. We've got our kind of big mystery and our big heist coming, and I know there's a sequel to this, so I really want to get through this so I can pick up the sequel. The next book is The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I had this as a library audiobook, and I'm 47% of the way through the audiobook. It was also returned to the library before I could finish it. This one is a story of slavery from a slave's perspective, and a lot of the clips or blurbs that you read about it is it's the psychology of slavery from a slave's perspective. And it's really fascinating to read, and I really enjoy the narrator. I believe his name is John Moses. I will sarcastically tell myself if I'm right or wrong, maybe throw up a picture. Who knows? But I really enjoy his narrating. It really makes the book easy to listen to. And I'm really looking forward to get it back because I'm almost 50% of the way through, and I'm really interested to see where the story goes from here. All right. Next, we have Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. I have this as a library audiobook, and I'm 7% of the way through. This one, as a lot of you know, is a biography of Alexander Hamilton that is the basis for the Hamilton musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda. So this one is hella long, like 40 hours, not quite 40 hours. I think it's more like 35 or 36 hours of audiobook, which is long. And so 7% represents the first 3 hours of audiobook. It's ridiculous. But I've just gotten through Hamilton's childhood, and I'm really interested in moving on, and we'll see how much further I get for the next updates. All right, next one, very, very exciting. I finally made progress on A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R. R. Martin. I have this as a library ebook, and I made 39% progress this month. I am making progress. I'm really enjoying this one now that I'm really into reading it, and I'm out of that kind of initial setup short story, because it's 3 of his shorter novellas that have been smushed together to make one book. And I really like it because we're only focusing on 2 characters, Duncan the Tall and Egg. And so we're not switching viewpoints, which is wonderful, but we're getting a lot of the backstory for Westeros and understanding more about different areas of Westeros that maybe we didn't see as much in Game of Thrones. And I'm really, really enjoying the world building and myth building that's going into these set of short stories. And hopefully I will be finished with them soon. Alright, next are the books that I've made no progress on at all this month, which none of these titles should be a surprise for anybody at this point, which are Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Lord Fowl's Bane by Stephen R. Donaldson, and Heart of Europe by Peter Wilson. I've been working on clearing out my in progresses. I really have. So a lot of books that I've been working on are either making progress or clearing out, which is great. But at some point, I'm going to have to actually sit down and finish these books so I can get them off my to-read lists or in-progress reading lists. Finally, we come to, or not finally, next we have the On Deck section, which is, these are the books that are on deck for whenever I finish something, or the next up books to start reading based on either my library holds or whatever. And I've only got one this month. I'm not doing an audiobook this month because due to my work from home, I'm not listening to as many audiobooks. And I really just want to give myself some breathing room to try and get some of my backlog of stuff done before I try and either borrow more or rotate some more stuff in. But for books, my hold for The Toll by Neil Shusterman, which is Arc of the Scythe Book 3, came in as an ebook from my library, and I am going to be reading that. And I'm really, really excited to see how this series ends, so I'm probably going to drop most of my books and focus on that to try and get that read so I don't have to send it back to the library and then wait another 2 months to get it again. Alright, now we come to stats time, which is my favorite time to look at stuff. And at some point I should probably do like graphs and things to show you the reads versus in progress versus on decks. But for the month of May, I read 5 books completely. I currently have 8 books on my reading list, and I have 1 book on deck. And when I tally up all the progress I made on those 8 books, I made 119% progress. So I've basically read an entire another book in progress on my other books, which is really, really good for me. I'm really happy. So if I had been reading 1 book at a time, I could have finished a whole nother book this month. But regardless, I'm really excited. I'm hoping June will be a better reading month and that I will get out of my slump. Maybe a couple of these YA books will help jumpstart me to get me reading some more. But with that, I do hope you enjoyed. Please comment down below if you agree or disagree with any of my takes or have any books that you think I should check out based on what I'm reading or what I have read. And with that, please do remember, like and subscribe, and I will see you all in another video.